So why are so many Americans thinking about leaving the US? Let's take a look.
Why Americans are leaving America.
This is a special security announcement.
Americans' interest in moving out of the U.S. is on the rise. So I hopped a plane and traveled to a Living Abroad conference in Atlanta.
Why are there so many damn conferences? There's a conference about people who want to leave the US. I mean, there's too many damn conferences. There's probably a conference about how to take a dump in the bathroom without stinking your room up. I bet you if you Google it, you'll find it. Let's go, man.
To find out why.
I think people are beginning to wonder if the US is as great as they always thought it was.
Yeah, that's it, right? Did we reach peak America? What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the FoFty channel, where we're all about factory resetting our minds so that we live life according to our own expectations and nobody else's. Now, when I left the United States 8 years ago, I had been living there for over 30 years, so that was a pretty big change. And an example of how I took matters into my own hands to live a FoFty life. And the reasons why I left back then, I believe have only grown over time. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about those fundamental factors. But make no mistake, what really matters is not where you're leaving and where you're going to, but actually what is going on internally inside of you that has spurred you to think about leaving wherever you are. Let's go back to that news clip from last year.
As a joke, he had said if President Biden got elected, we're gone. We're out of here.
That's funny because that's actually back, in 2016, that was before the election where Donald Trump was elected president. And I had actually said something like that. I said, look, I think Donald Trump's going to win. And actually back then, nobody believed that he was going to win. But I thought he was going to win after he won the Republican National Convention. And I was like, look, if he wins, I'm out of here. And this is not a political thing, whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever, right? The fact is that I just thought that the political system was going to get so divided that there was going to be all kinds of riffraff and unrest as a result. Because I'm neither Republican or Democrat. I really don't care because I'm actually not an American citizen.
And it happened.
In fact, politics are pushing Americans on both sides of the aisle to pack their bags.
Yeah.
International Living reported 1,000% increase in web traffic
crazy.
after Roe versus Wade was overturned. Meanwhile, the 2016 election of Donald
exactly.
Trump, George
That's what
Floyd
happened.
protests, and the
Man, there's a lot of
COVID-19
stuff that
pandemic.
happened
And then there are
And, they don't even show all the other stuff like the storming of the Capitol last year. And I mean, there's all these other things that have happened since I've left. And, when I look back, I really do think that things have taken a turn to the downside, unfortunately.
the growing number of digital nomads, Americans who can work remotely, even internationally, post-pandemic.
It was more like, okay, I don't.
That's exactly what I'm doing, right? I'm being a digital nomad between where I am now in Singapore, but also traveling to Bali, where I'm planning to build the center for FoFty, where people can come and have the experiential component of the learning.
Have to make a lot of money. I don't have to work too hard.
Jessica Ramesh now calls Panama home.
I think that there's always a risk when you're running from instead of running to. And I think your reasons for going abroad have to be deeper than that.
And that's really important. Look, she hit it right on the head. It's not, first of all, she was saying you can have a recalibration and a balance of life when you understand that money isn't the God that rules everything, right? You can kind of turn the volume down there and turn up the volume in other areas of your life. And so that's one of the reasons why I think people, including myself, started looking. But she was totally right in saying that you got to understand of the reasons why you're looking to move. It's not necessarily just the location you're coming from and going to, but why you're actually looking. And that's something we should really not dismiss and actually pull on and really go deep into. So here's the thing. It's not just the old people like you saw in the video who are just, going through these conferences and thinking about retiring, but it's actually a lot of the younger generation as well. I mean, there's article after article talking about the Gen Z and how they're thinking about, looking out and traveling the world and not necessarily living in the US. And, look at this article where they interviewed about 3,000 Gen Zers. And, the stat that kind of stuck to me was, the average was 3 points. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely were you to move out of the United States and that your future would be outside of the US, and the average was 3.1, which is more than half. So more than half of the sample size of Gen Zers who were interviewed said that they view their future being outside of the United States than inside of the United States. And that's kind of that's a compelling stat right there, you know. And if you look at like things such as did gun violence impact your decision, um, and it was a majority is yes. But here's something interesting: is have digital nomad influencers or expert communities, and most of them said no, meaning like they don't really care about the digital nomad and influencer life. They actually just so that means they're not like about that life, right? That's not why the younger ones are thinking about moving out to chase some life like that. It's actually for more compelling fundamental reasons such as gun violence. Now here's an interesting graphic here. So where they plan to go, the younger ones, where would they want to go? And top five. And you got Singapore, which is where I went to, still in the mix, which is interesting because Singapore is a really, really tiny city state. Um, but if you look at it, these are all very well developed countries in Europe and some parts of Asia. Not only would they want to just move, they actually, 66 would start a family abroad. And, that's a huge undertaking. Maybe they don't understand what starting a family really is, but they're thinking that they would do it. And that's a pretty high number, right? To basically raise your kids. So that means education, they've thought through these things and they believe that the income, the support, the hospital system, the education system are all better outside. So we got to talk about my case, right? And my history of how I ended up in the US to begin with and what I did there for over 3 decades and what led to me booking out. And I'm a Korean. I'm a full-blooded Korean, but I was born and I spent the first 18 years of my life in the Philippines, which is another developing nation out in Southeast Asia. And so that's kind of home for me, even though I'm Korean. That the Philippines is kind of home for me. And it wasn't until I went to college or university that I actually went to the United States, and that was back in '92. So I went to the United States to go to Tufts University, where I got my undergraduate degrees there, and I spent 4 years studying in Beantown over at Medfed. Shout out to all the locals still there. And, got my degrees and I stayed in Boston and built and started my career, right? And I was working for this company called Wellington Management, which, it's like now it's $1 trillion company. If in investment management, they're one of the leading sub-advisory firms that controls where money flows. And was able to, I got a good job there. I was, made it up to vice president. I was 20 years old. I had my own office, and it was a success. And that helped me get a green card, which is something that's very hard to get. Which is basically permanent residency. You can just work wherever you want to in the United States. And I got my green card. And I didn't marry an American citizen and kind of cheat and go that way to get a green card. I just worked my butt off and got a great job and had the company apply on my behalf to get a green card, which I did. And so from there, I ended up working at some top companies in the United States. I worked at McKinsey and Company, as you know, is a top consulting firm. I was in the New York, Manhattan office, and I headed up a function in their investment office over there. And then after that, I moved to Bridgewater, which was over in Connecticut, and that's with Ray Dalio and top hedge fund of the world. And I learned quite a bit. And I might do another episode of my experience at Bridgewater because that was a trip, dude. Working at Bridgewater is not like working at any other company out there. And then I ditched all that and moved out to Silicon Valley to create my own startup called Bean Choice. And if you go to Google, you could see there. I mean, there's still a lot of articles about that whole thing. But yeah, I ditched my career and built a startup because this was 10 years ago almost, but basically we didn't think that it was right that big tech was taking all your data, your privacy data, your behavioral, like what you're clicking online, packaging it and selling to all the advertisers for billions of dollars. I mean, now that's like an obvious thing, but wasn't that obvious back then? This is like, you got to understand, there was no, you are the product term didn't even exist back then. Nobody knew that they were just getting taken under. And so we thought that was wrong, and we tried to build a startup that actually fought against that. And even though, so we ended up getting actually banned Um, yeah, by Apple. We had an app, and Apple basically kicked us out. That was like a whole thing, right? We kind of went viral. We were on the front page of Financial Times and next to Twitter, and that was a whole trip. That's another thing I gotta just do a video on to share about that whole story. But basically, at the end of that, we decided that we were part of the fight for privacy and advocacy of online privacy, and we were part of the story of what it is today, where now it's a front and center thing, and everybody knows about it. And because of that, I feel like we did succeed in contributing to the success that we see today. But it was actually at that point, at the end of our startup, where we basically, I got banned. My Apple developer account was like killed by Apple, and they sent me this nasty email talking about how I can't log in anymore. Where, I was kind of like wondering, what the heck am I going to do now? Am I, do another startup, or, am I going back to like corporate America for another job? And I really couldn't answer that question because I mean, dude, I was so burnt out from that startup. I mean, we there was a lot of legal stuff going on, and there were lawyers coming up to us asking us like, "Yo, we should fight Apple, right? This is wrong, and you don't have to pay us unless you win." Blah blah blah, and just that was just so much pressure, and I just got fatigued. So I didn't know if I could do another startup at that point in my life, and then the notion of going back to yeah, going back to corporate America after doing the startup was just like, dude, what am I going to learn? I was already working at some of these top shelf companies, and I see what I had to see, right? And I had senior positions and executive positions there, and like I was not going to go back to that. So it was like stuck, and that's where I kind of started looking internally, and again, FoFty life principles, but I ended up understanding that I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about you know what I would be doing, but actually, the question was more about where I would be doing what. And the where was because I started to understand that, just accepting the default that you're just in this country forever and ever and ever and you'll never change. Well, that's something that's just been fed to me, right? And the moment I started thinking for myself, I realized that that really didn't work for me, and that I should start looking at other parts of the entire world that might be better suited. And so when I rather flipped the question to, where rather than what, it opened the whole world up. And so then it was just a process of elimination, right? Like, where would I move to? And it ended up eventually being this tiny city state called Singapore. And the answer was because, well, number one, they speak English there, so that'd be great for my then fiance to come with me. And dude, she's a trooper, right? She was like, yo, I'm coming with you wherever we go, which is why I married her. And, like, that was a big thing, like the language, and it was a gateway to Asia, and it's closer to my parents. I thought that it was back then going to be a hotspot for innovation and startups in Southeast Asia, which it eventually did become. And it was a developed country, so for those reasons we ended up deciding to pack our bags and move over to Singapore. So leaving the United States was not easy, right? As a green card holder and a permanent resident, I found out, and to my surprise, or rather, I shouldn't be surprised really, I was going to get taxed no matter what, right? So I was working in Singapore for a Singaporean company, and guess what? Uncle Sam's still going to come and take his tax money from me. And I thought that was like, what? I'm not even living in the States. Why am I paying US taxes? And I'm not even a US citizen. So, it turns out it doesn't matter, right? You're still going to have to pay tax anywhere in the world you live in. And so that got me thinking. I was like, listen, I'm not going to do this, right? So I'm going to relinquish my green card. And what I discovered is, okay, fine, you can relinquish your green card, but if you do, you're still going to have to file this exit tax form. So if you make, there's this line, if you go over that line, meaning you have more than that in assets, basically, if you're worth that much money, they're going to come and get you just so you can exit not being a green card holder. It's the same thing if you want to give up your US citizenship, right? If you're an American citizen. And so I had to go through that whole thing, and wow, that was just a very long and tedious process. But eventually I got it all done. I paid everything that I need to pay, and I got out of the system. And the funny thing is, it's in the system. So like these days, when I go back to the United States for a visit, at immigration, look at my passport and they'll see that I, I gave things up. And I always get greeted by this question by the immigration officer. It's like, so why did you leave the US? And I'm like, you got enough time to talk about this? Because I don't do that because, they can power trip and just deny me access if they don't want me, they don't like me. So I'm always quiet about it. But yeah, that's the thing, man. Since I moved here 8 years ago into Singapore, life has generally been great, right? Things work here, there's no violence here, and everything's just a calibration towards more safety and systemization when you give back a little bit of freedom. But I wouldn't say like, oh my God, you spit out a piece of chewing gum, you're going to go to jail or you're going to get whipped for doing something small, like littering on the street. I mean, look, people litter here. There's litter on the streets. It's not like some draconic, like, you're going to get slashed for like, doing something like that. I think that's exaggerated in the media. Honestly, after living here for 8 years, I don't think I've really given up my rights. I feel like, seems like same to me. It's just safer and everything works and everything is newer. So yeah, there's a lot of videos about people moving to Singapore, Americans moving to Singapore. So I ain't gonna do another one of those, but I did want to do a reaction to one of them that I found just to give you a flavor of like, what people perceive and what I think, right? So let's go.
It's hot. For 4 years, I've just been sweating. I miss my US sports. The cost of the car is absurd. I miss the Mexican food. Rent is so expensive.
Yeah.
You don't stop sweating. You just get used to it over.
He's totally right about the sweating. When I first arrived here, some of my old high school friends were here, and one of them's like, well, at the airport, he's like, "Welcome to hell," and I'm like, "What?" But like, I totally get it now. I mean, it's not that it's so hot. I mean, if you go to Arizona and parts of these states, it's actually even hotter, Death Valley. But it's the humidity that really gets you here. So it's like, dude, you take a shower, you come out, and you're like, you feel sticky. So that's a thing, right? For sure.
I like Singapore. This is Ryan. He's American. I was born in Ohio, but he lives in Singapore and works for Google. I've been in Singapore.
Googler. Yeah, so Singapore is basically where a lot of MNCs, or what they call multinational companies, come and set up shop here to do operations around Southeast Asia or APAC, if you include Australia. And that's because Singapore is safe, it's trustworthy, the systems all work here. There's no like corruption, riffraff, and the government is very lax when it comes to bringing companies in for tax, and the list goes on. So Singapore is a hub for that, and so you get a lot of these MNCs that are here in Singapore, and one of them being Google, and so they then employ a lot of people, and this individual is somebody they imported from the United States, I guess.
Almost 4 years. Ryan is my good buddy. I don't like being a giver. I convinced him to reveal all his secrets to my
You
YouTube
convinced him.
subscribers.
Wow.
I know. In this video, you will know pros and cons of living in Singapore as an American, most important things that you should know before moving here, and cost of living and all potential expenses for a foreigner. Let's go! Like, costs in Singapore feel a little out of whack.
Yes.
To what I was used to. For
Yes.
things like a car.
I mean, so living here is very, very expensive. This is a part that you see on social media and movies like Crazy Rich Asians and all that. It is kind of true, right?
Cost of a car is absurd.
Yeah, so the car thing is crazy too, because it's like it's not only the car costs a lot, but you have to pay like this for a piece of paper to be allowed to buy a car before buying the car itself, and that could be up to 100,000 Sing dollars, which is like 70,000 US dollars, 50,000, 70, 80,000 depending. So you're paying that much money just for the right to buy a car, and then the car itself is ridiculously expensive. Like you buy like a Toyota Camry or Honda Civic, and it's like the price of a Lambo.
Just like a beer. It's kind of ridiculous. Cost of
Yeah.
housing is really high, although there's other places that are like that too. So yeah, it's the cost of thing. I don't have a lot to complain about though.
And what they do here is they tax you on things that they don't think is really great for yourself or for society. So like cars, they want you to use public transport to reduce the carbon footprint and less traffic. So if you want to have to buy a car, you're gonna have to pay, right? Pay up for something that's really not great for everybody in society. So that's where the government kind of plays its role, like things like cigarettes or alcohol. They tax you up to, it's not good for you, and ultimately government's gonna have to pay. When you get sick from alcoholism or from cancer from cigarettes, you go to hospitals there in life. So they don't want that, right? So they'll tax you. They'll tax you for these what they consider to be like vices, which to some degree kind of works here.
Singapore?
A life in a condo, like in condominium in Singapore. You experience this kind of thing in San Francisco?
I find here that people are more actually like friendly. Like my current condo sort of feels like a mini community, and a lot of people are friends and hang out at the pool, and the kids all play together. San
Okay.
Francisco wasn't like that. I was
Okay. Look, you got to understand, this guy is a Googler, right? So they imported him from Google in the US. So that means like he's got that thing going on, right? And so what they call that expats, or people from a company from another country going to that same company's other branch location in another country. That's a expatriate or expat. And expats kind of like live together in a community and they kind of know each other. Oh, you're another foreigner. Oh yeah, let's get together. So I get it. I get what he's saying, that there is expat communities. Um, but it's not really like the way the country is, honestly. And, I'm not an expat, right? I gave up my green card and everything, and I moved and worked for a Singaporean company straight up, right? So I'm not an expat at all. So I got to live with Singaporeans, and, me and my wife are immersed into the culture here. And, it's not really the case, right? Singaporeans, because again, filial piety and the Chinese influence, of which the majority ethnically are Chinese here, there is, that Chinese culture, which is, you're not going to go up to somebody and be like, hey, how's the weather today? Yeah, what are you doing this afternoon? Want to go for a ride? No, that's not happening. That's what you have in the States and Australia and Canada. That is not what is going on here, right? I know in those countries, if you don't like go out of your way and say hello, that's kind of considered rude. Here, it's kind of like the reverse. Like, it's like Korea, Japan, right? You don't go up to somebody in the street or somebody in your neighborhood and be like, yo, what's up, man? They're going to look at you like you got some screws loose in your head.
didn't have a kid, so that could be part of the reason. But I didn't really know like my neighbors or anything. It was a small building.
Yeah. Anyway, we're not going to do a whole like how is it like to live in Singapore video, because I mean, shout in the comments if you want me to do that, but that's not the point of the video. The point of this video is to actually let you know about the reasons of why I decided to leave the US, and the underlying reason behind that has only grown. And so for people to understand that it's not about, again, the location from where you're going to the location where you're going to. It's not about the location. It's about what's going on in your life. Understanding that you can take control over your situation and not just accept the status quo and the default settings, which is why you have to factory reset yourself. And that includes a default setting where you just accept that you're going to stay in some country that you were born in for forever and ever until you die, because that's the only way and that's where the family is. That could be a way, but it is not the only way, and you need to be able to break out of like that default understanding and at least have a chance to question that and to ask yourself if that's really true in your case. And you could arrive with the answer that, yeah, it is in your case, you have to stay here or you want to stay here and it's good for you. But at least ask that question and really go through the thinking and thought process around it before just accepting that default. You might be surprised with what you arrive at with the answer to your situation. So having said that, we're going to wrap up this video. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the session and look forward to the next video with y'all. Peace.